water, ready to use for agriculture, ready to use for producing energy, or for human potable consumption or industry, whatever it is. So you see, these are examples of how dependent is your resources on land based on the water. El Niño produces a lot of climatic problems, and something that is interesting to take into account is that the hurricane season in the Caribbean has less hurricanes when you have El Niño. You could question, this year we had only the effect of one hurricane approaching some of the islands of the Caribbean, 1 or 2 the most, when we normally have 8 or 10. So it is important that when we have El Niño, we have less hurricanes on the Caribbean basin. Also, we have an increase in the number of electric storms in the southern part of the United States, which is 50% more during the time of El Niño. And then the distribution of precipitation changes. And this is the main factor that people see on the news every day. What happens is that in places like it never rains or rains very little, like in Lima or some other countries, it rains. Or in cities or places in which it rains a lot, rains almost nothing, say in the Pacific side of Central America, southern part of Mexico. Okay, that's important. And the main manifestation of these circumstances is, and this is an example of Central America that I put over here, is that there is what is called the drought corridor along Central America that goes from the Arco Seco of Panama, passing by the northwestern part of Costa Rica, connecting with the Pacific of Nicaragua, central and Pacific of Honduras and Salvador, and southern part of Guatemala, and southern part of Mexico too. So the effects of the drought in Central America, when you have the climate variability called El Niño, is very important. So when you are trying to innovate for accessing clean water for human consumption, or try to increase the efficiency for agriculture, you have to understand what kind of climate associated with the amount of water that you're going to have. Because you could deal with the more efficient system for agriculture, but if you have no rain, you have no water. So your innovation is going to be in big trouble. Okay, so that's why it is important to understand all the dynamics of the association between water resources and the atmosphere. And this is a real pictures of these days, in which what we are having here is the main factors that are affecting Central America, Colombia, Peru, and so on, regarding the phenomenon of El Niño and the drought that these people is having. Okay, these are some just illustration, but this is a good example on. This is an example on how the people is affected, but this is an example on how the business. And this is interesting because if you want to be good business people, you have to see how the big business adapt to this type of things. And this is the case that I like to present to you about the Canal of Panama, which is a great example of using water for moving ships on transportation through the canal, with a cost per ship that sometimes could reach $250,000 to move one ship from one side to the other one. So you can imagine what happened when you don't have enough water to move these ships. The business collapses. So it doesn't mean that a small business is the only one that are affected. No, large business can also be affected. But they have, by nature, they have their own ways of adapting. And one way is that they could transform their business in some way. Let me show you this example to be more precise on this. Between 97 and 98, there was another phenomenon of El Niño. There was a strong drought that affected the Canal of Panama. The amount of water that they need to have in order to move ships from the Caribbean to the Pacific, or from the Pacific to the Caribbean, remember, with a cost of up to $250,000 per ship, is this one. This is the green line that you can see over here. This is the more critical level of water that you could have. But you see that during this period, they have 1 to 3, almost 4 months, 4 months in which the water was below the critical level. So you cannot move the ships from one side to the other one. So you are losing millions of dollars during 3 months of not moving ships. That's very important. So how you adapt your business? What kind of idea can you bring to the table of the board, of the CEOs, and all these people to adjust? First, you have to understand the phenomenon. You have to understand what is the forecast. You have to understand that water is climate dependent here, and climate variability is going to affect it. So what they did, adapting to this condition, is that they changed the size of the chips, and they keep on charging per chip and not for the load that they could carry. Okay, so in some way the business was adapted, but now they're facing another challenge. Let me just show you this. And as you know, there is a new engineering part of this being worked out. They have a wider type of it's called esclusas in Espanol. I don't know how it's called in English, but anyhow, this is how the chips are moved, and this is the actual size, and this is the new largest size. They say that they use 7% more less water than the ones from before. So they have been trying to innovate from the hydraulic point of view in order to recycle the same water that they use, so they don't have to depend on climate as they did it before. So these are kind of innovations. There is this kind of ideas of people that are being transforming. Let me just very briefly, because I want to have more interactions with you that me talking about. There are some other things that affect also the climate. The climate change is one of them. You could have you could take a look of how the climate is changing. This is data. This is not something that is model. This is just a data that between 1901 and 2012 that shows that the Americas is a region really that is warming up from 1 to 3 degrees Celsius, and this is very important. And when you model this under a scenario more conservative like this, or more severe like this order, really we are in trouble, because we are under the spell of climate change regarding temperature. You can study climate change using all this type of approaches. I'm not going to go into many details of this part, because it is time consuming, and probably it might not be that important for you, but for those of you who would like to be interested in that, we have some specialists working on this modeling and downscaling techniques for climate change and so on, and also how to monitor and how to work on climate variability studies in order to associate to water. So the important thing is that the impacts of climate change in the Americas are associated to extreme climates, impacts on agriculture, impacts on biodiversity, impacts on human health, on water resources, and marine and coastal resources too, because of sea level rise, water intrusion, and so on. So these are some of the things. Let me just remind you some important outcome of last year. The fifth assessment report from IPCC concluded, and these are determinant in some way, that there are some things that are attributed to climate change, and these are solid and contundentes, which means very strong in some way for the hemisphere. Okay, and there are some pictures and examples on the report, and I invite you to take a look. But these are the ones associated to water in the Americas, for North America, for Central and South America, and for island states like the ones in the Caribbean. So one of the more important things, and I'm going to talk just about two of them. One is the one associated with the melting of the glaciers in the Andean countries. We're talking about Argentina, Chile, Ecuador, Bolivia, Peru, some parts of Colombia too. So there is a fact. The level of confidence is very high, and the contribution to climate change is huge. So there is not going to be any other study from science that replaces this. The melting of the glacier is a fact in South America, in North America. So the water that depends for agriculture or for human consumption based on these resources is going to be affected. So we need a lot of thoughts about how to adapt to new condition of water, trying to be more efficient in its use. We could talk about several other things, about the changes in the runoff or the amount of water that we have from the Amazonas. We could talk about in some of the subbasins of the Rio de la Plata, how it is going to change and so on. And also we could talk about some of the major facts in the United States too. But I just want to stress the point that climate change is going to bring several effects on what we have as normal so far. Okay. I wanted to put this chart over here because this is something that I see very interested for you to think about it. Is that we need to integrate knowledge, and this is where we could put something for the specific. Well, you want to work on agriculture, or you want to work in water consumption. So we have a lot of lesson learned, experiences, and good practices in the Americas as a whole. And what we don't have is good toolkits or webs dedicated to policies formulation for these specific areas, which includes the climate change scenarios with the climate vulnerability scenarios. I know that it may sound complicated and too specific, but if you really would like to have an incidence based from the potential business of the future for sectors like production of food or potable water for human consumption, everything goes through policies in some way, because what we want to, through our examples, to stimulate these policies at the regional, at the local level that could help us to adapt, to mitigate, or to transform. So building these systems could be an impressive contribution for communities, for states, for countries, for regions, and of course for the Americas. Okay, that's important. The other factor that is depending on water is the water demand. Water demand depends on the amount of people that we have. Water demand depends on the water that we are going to use for have more irrigated area to produce more food. Water demand depends on how we use water for hydroelectricity, and then what it means that the water demand is a big determinant for our potential uses. So let's summarize. Summarizing, we have global determinants that basically we could have good examples during these 15 years of this century. We have an exponential pollution of the bodies of water that required more investments for maintaining, for potable water, for sanitation, for hydroelectricity, for transportation, for tourism, for recreation. The supply of water has can be affected a lot by climate variability and climate change, and the demand is going to increase a lot, especially to, as I mentioned, population growth and the competing of use. So let me just go for 1 second to one of the things that we do, especially with the youth. One of the things that we have been working with is on water harvesting as a local example of potentially use, especially for rural and remote regions. In some of we're working at the borders, especially, which are very depressed regions, and that's very interesting. And because I believe that creating some type of independence from the main suppliers of water, especially in rural communities where water cannot be reached through the pipelines because of the huge investments that are necessary, is an opportunity, creates an opportunity to innovate in water harvesting. And this is one idea that we have been working in the region of Honduras, Guatemala, and El Salvador, in this very dry border, and also at this adjacency zone between Belize and Guatemala, in which we are building, and this is, let's say, important, we are building from all this climate data, okay? We are building all these systems. So we are building scenarios for different types of demand. We have when we have little water, or when we have more water per month. We are transforming all this rain into liters of water based on the size of the roofs that we have. In these examples, we are using, for example, for a community, the roofs from a church and the roofs from schools, and we are creating this type of system for the kids at the schools to have clean and potable water. We are showing them how to make this water potable too. And also when they have plenty of water, the drainage from this water is going to be used for irrigating their crops and so on. At a small farm and levels, that could be okay. Because we are approaching the 12, I asked Arturo if he considered that we could have some interactions with you guys for the precision of that you would like to issues. But my important message here is that we have to understand the big challenges that water is facing in the planet associated with other important factors and determinant, and how these affect factors like the climate that is the mere controlling of water in order for us to be into the business of water for potable or water for agriculture. Arturo?
Thank you, Mr. Campos. Mr. Campos, for your words. It's a really interesting topic regarding the future of, as you mentioned before, the access to water in the Americas and how it will be affecting its demand through people and industrial sectors. We have now received some questions through our chat system. So I don't know if you want to answer the questions right now.
Yeah, well, if I can.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can.
Of course, yeah. Okay, so the first question will be, what are the current situations of water access in South American countries? Is it a big challenge of not as big as in some Caribbean countries?
Okay, I would say that it is an interesting question because and actually when I will for my next conference I will try to put some other examples that give you a better idea on that, and that's it. For South America, depending on where you are, of course, depending on where you are, but in general, we could say that the access of water is still more. It is less stressing as it is for some countries like the Caribbean countries. In the Caribbean, with exceptions probably of Dominica, which is an island with a lot of water, there are a lot of stress on the water use and water consumption on the Caribbean. But I would say that for South America, it's still an opportunity that good management could deal a lot with the demand that they have. What they have in South America that they need to be considered is the competing of the uses of water from so many sectors. For example, agriculture is competing with the extracting industry a lot. And this you could see at the Andes region, you could see it in South America also, when you have a lot of crops being produced from, for example, from biofuels. And so the food productivity is competing with the potentials of water use in other areas. Okay, that's important. Another factor that needs to be into account is that Latin America as a whole is growing into more, is oriented to be more urban. So the more urban you are, the more water dependent you become in some way. So that would be a partial answer to this.
Okay, thank you. Yes, we have a second question. It says, how climate change in regard of rising ocean water levels will affect the access to drinking water? Are they related in any way?
Yes, they are, directly. There is a direct relation between climate change, sea level rise, and access to drinking water, especially in the coastline, and those cities who are depending on the aquifers from the coast regions in order to have their supply. So what happens is that the more water you extract from the aquifers along the coastlines, the more potential of salt intrusion do you have. So there is a straight relationship into that. And if you see the news from the last 2 weeks, there is a strong warning on how the melting of the of the Antarctica is taking place, and the potential of having an accelerated sea level rise. And I think that this is going to be a strong argument for reaching some type of consensus in Kyoto, in Paris next days. So that's a straightforward, especially for those populations who are along the coastlines and those countries along the Caribbean.
Okay, thank you. The third question will be how access to water is measured. Is it just for drinking water or any kind of water?